When this man was being tried for murdering a 7-year-old girl, the girl's mother pulled out a gun in the courtroom and shot him in the middle of the trial. The first shot hit him dead center and he collapsed to the floor, but she wasn't satisfied. She fired 7 more times before finally being restrained by police officers who handcuffed her. Because of this, she was placed in the same position as the murderer to be tried for assassination, knowing that this crime in Germany carried a sentence of life in prison. But before the judge could strike the gavel, she stated she couldn't hold back her rage because that man had already taken other lives in the past and had never been convicted. Even so, the judge sentenced her to 6 years. Immediately, crowds began protesting in the streets for her release, while she maintained exemplary behavior in prison. After 3 years, she was released and became a celebrity. When this prisoner of war was taken into a room with a furnace, a man pulled a heated dagger from inside and blinded him in both eyes without causing any other injury. They repeated the same process with 99 other prisoners, and when it was the last man's turn, they left one of his eyes intact. After that, all of them were tied to one another with ropes and released to find their way back home. They walked for weeks, crossing multiple mountain ranges, and when they finally reached their king's palace, the sight was so shocking that he suffered a heart attack, bringing the war to an end. When this man was attacked by a bear and left unable to move, 2 of his companions decided to stay behind in that forest to care for him until he finally passed away. As the rest of the group continued their journey, those 2 men knew he didn't stand a chance of survival and began digging a grave for him while he watched, unable to say a word. The problem arose when a group of Indians appeared on the horizon. In a fit of desperation, they grabbed the wounded man's rifle, threw him into the grave alive, and fled without even having time to cover the tomb with earth to give him a dignified end. After they had escaped and the Indians had also passed, the man in the tomb fainted and eventually regained consciousness, noticing that the hole had a tree root he could use to climb out. After pulling himself up, he dragged himself across the ground to the riverbank and continued crawling there for days, drinking contaminated water and eating moss until he was finally found by a group of Indians who saved his life. When this man entered the bank dressed as Santa Claus and the employees laughed, he pulled out a gun and shouted, "Ho, ho, ho," announcing that it was a robbery. The problem was that before he went into the bank, he'd been seen from far away by a child, who at that moment was calling her friends so they could go ask for presents from the Santa Claus standing there. Meanwhile, the man went straight into the vault, grabbed the money with incredible ease, kept shouting "ho, ho, ho" to mock the employees, and stuffed all the cash he could into his sack. But as soon as he walked out the front door, 10 children surrounded him and started yelling for presents, and he didn't have the courage to pull out his gun to scare them away. Because of that, a man who had witnessed the robbery took advantage of the distraction, punctured the robber's car tire, and immediately called the police. Even so, Santa Claus ran to the car and sped off at full speed until he started skidding and eventually stopped, being caught by the police thanks to the children. When this priest wanted to raise money for charity, he attached 1,000 balloons to a chair and launched himself into the sky. A few minutes later, the wind carried him over the ocean, and he realized he couldn't change its direction, so he decided to drop some stones attached to the chair in order to fly even higher. But as he started going above the clouds, the air became cold and unbreathable. After reaching half the altitude of a commercial airplane, he became desperate and used his phone to call his friends, who immediately contacted the country's air force to try to find him. While boats and airplanes were sent to search for him everywhere, the man became too scared to use his parachute and fall into the sea. So he waited for days as the search continued. But after 4 days in the sky, the man was found on the beach, unfortunately not alive. This man had a tumor on his forehead that looked like a second head, yet he still struggled every day working on a railroad construction site. Unfortunately, his boss called him into a special meeting only to fire him and hand him over to an entrepreneur friend. In this new job, they drew a second face onto the man's tumor and put him to perform in a circus. It drew massive attention, and the circus was always packed. Because of this, he earned enough money to finally afford the surgery to remove the tumor, but he was stopped by the businessmen who wanted to keep profiting from him. Over time, however, the tumor began to press against his skull, causing him to faint several times during performances. Eventually, the police began showing up at the shows and were utterly shocked by what they saw. They banned his act in several locations and forced the businessmen to provide the surgery. He underwent the procedure and survived. This boy was born with a severe immune system disorder and was forced to live his entire life inside a plastic bubble because any bacteria could kill him. Because of that, he couldn't even touch his own mother, and everything that entered the bubble had had to be completely sterilized. Over time, his mother expanded the bubble until it was almost the size of an entire room and even put a TV inside it. But even so, never having friends took a heavy toll on the boy until NASA created a special spacesuit that allowed him to leave the house for the first time in his life when he was 12 years old. Still, it was dangerous and extremely uncomfortable, so doctors tried the only possible solution to free him from the bubble, a bone marrow transplant from his sister. And although the surgery itself was a success, his sister's bone marrow carried a dormant virus which infected him and unfortunately gave his body no chance to fight back. When this woman suffered a cardiac arrest at home, her 3-year-old daughter ended up trapped inside the apartment completely alone. Immediately, the little girl shook her mother's body and realized she wasn't going to wake up. A few hours later, she walked to the bedroom door, but noticed she couldn't reach the handle. So she dragged a heavy chair to the door and climbed on it, managing to open it and see the apartment in complete silence. Trying to get help, she went to the front door to call a neighbor, but after grabbing another chair and climbing up to the handle, she realized the door was locked and she didn't know how to unlock it. As a result, she spent days surviving without food, going only a few times a day to the sink to drink water. But after 4 days, a terrible smell began to fill the apartment and spread throughout the building. Luckily, the odor reached the neighbors, who called the police and rescued the girl. The ship arrived at a port in the United States carrying tons of tea, but several Indians were already waiting for it. One of the Indians climbed up the side of the ship and pointed a spear at a sailor, who handed over the key to the ship's cargo hold. Meanwhile, the others boarded the ship and went straight to the storage room that held enough tea for an entire city. Little by little, they carried the tea out onto the deck and stacked all the crates together. The tribe's leader, holding his spear, slashed the tea bag, letting the leaves spill into the water and creating the largest cup of tea in history, made with seawater. They kept going until all 340 chests of tea inside the ship were completely empty, while the waves naturally mixed the tea. And as soon as the last of the tea was gone and the water had turned completely brown, all the Indians left the ship at the same time and removed their disguises, revealing that they had done all of this because, at the time, they were a colony of England and refused to pay taxes on that tea. When this 6-year-old boy left his house, his home exploded and an enemy soldier pointed a gun right at his face, but didn't have the courage to pull the trigger. Minutes later, the boy lost his mother and his older brother in that massacre and became the only survivor of the entire village. Lacking the courage to kill him, all the enemy soldiers left, knowing the boy would probably starve to death within a few days. Luckily, Allied soldiers arrived the next day and found the boy lying on the ground. They realized it wasn't worth sending him to another city since it could be bombed just the same. So an officer adopted the boy and took him along to fight in the war, giving him simple tasks like carrying weapons from one place to another and bringing food to the soldiers. After 2 months, the boy marched with that group of soldiers all the way to the enemy army's capital. They emerged victorious from the war and received thousands of gold medals, but the trauma had already been done. When this woman's dog sadly died, she rushed his body to a laboratory that promised to bring him back. Right away, they charged her $100,000 and asked her to wait 6 months for the dog to return. In the meantime, the scientist made a small cut on the dog's ear to extract his DNA. Then the DNA was placed into an egg cell inside another female dog, which eventually gave birth to a puppy that was supposedly exactly the same as the one that had died, revived as a clone. But the moment the clone was delivered to its owner, it ran straight toward her and immediately bit her leg, something her old dog would never have done. Still, she took him home and tried to train him, but soon the dog started destroying things around the house for no reason and attacking her with bites and scratches every single day. With no other options, she surrendered the dog to a community kennel where he continued behaving aggressively toward other dogs and humans until the day he died. When these guys threw a dummy to test a water slide that had a loop, the dummy flew out and ended up decapitated. So they decided to cover the spot where it had landed with foam and threw another dummy in. This time the dummy ended up losing an arm, but the park owner refused to give up on the idea, adding more and more foam to keep the ride going. After throwing 20 more dummies down the slide, one of them finally survived, and the owner moved on to the second part of the test, asking an employee to test the ride. Since the guy didn't want to be fired, he agreed to test it while wearing full American football gear so he wouldn't die. After going down, he survived with only minor injuries. However, because he was wearing armor, he didn't realize that the dummies had left wooden splinters and plastic shards stuck at the top of the water slide. As soon as it was approved to open to the general public, people started getting sliced open and even hitting their heads in different places, which caused the government to show up in less than a month and immediately shut down the ride.